Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We have this morning, or maybe this afternoon or evening, we have with us Ann Douglas, and she is going to talk about navigating the school system. What do parents need to know in order to be effective advocates for their children within the school system? She will talk about how to forge and maintain relationships with key adults at your child's school, how to recognize opportunities to advocate for your child, and how to seize those opportunities, why it's important to keep detailed records, why it's important to seek support from other parents, and how to prevent little problems from snowballing into even bigger problems. Anne is an award-winning journalist and the author of 27 books, including Parenting Through the Storm. She has a website and has been featured in numerous publications. She leads parenting web workshops, is a keynote speaker at parenting shows across North America, and she teaches parenting courses through such highly respected parenting organizations as Ellis Center for Pregnancy and Parenting and Parents at Work. She's also a member of the Expert Advisory Board for Invest in Kids, a nonprofit Canadian charity that is developing a national parenting curriculum for parents. Anne and her husband, Neil, have 4 children. We welcome you, Anne. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Debbie. It's great to be back, and I'm really looking forward to talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is navigating the school system. And just so people know where I'm coming from, I have been a parent of 4 children who've all had some kind of struggle, some kind of mental health, neurodevelopmental, and/or behavioral challenge. And of course, if your child is struggling, chances are your child is struggling at school, and you are having to, step in and try to make things as good as possible for your child in any given school year. So what I want to talk about today is how to build relationships to be your allies so that they really want to help your child. I think where it becomes an adversarial kind of relationship, or we can go at this in a way where we forge relationships and work cooperatively with people at the school. And I think wherever possible, it's better to take the second path. Just to give you a little snapshot of sort of my family situation, my kids are now between the ages of 17 and 27. My youngest is just starting college this year, and I'm very happy and very actually all 4 did manage to navigate the school system, although there were times along the way where I wondered if we would have having them come out the other side and be able to go on and become young adults out in the world. It was a big worry time. So we're going to talk about that a bit today. So I'm just going to start moving my slides. The first thing I really want you to know is that you can make a huge difference for your child. Sometimes parents feel really intimidated because they think that people in the schools have this expert knowledge about education and so on, and they forget that they have expert knowledge when it comes to knowing and understanding their child. You are the expert when it comes to your child. You know your child better than anyone else, so you have invaluable knowledge to share with your child's school. So I just really want to give you a second to think about that, to really recognize your own expertise. You've been building this ever since your child was a baby, how to decode their body language and to make sense of their behavior and so on. So think of that. You have a decade or more of experience in coming to understand your child. That makes you so valuable to the school. So don't feel intimidated by the other people who have specific educational expertise. Just recognize that you're bringing together another crucial piece of the puzzle that will help them to do a great job of nurturing your child and helping your child have a great year at school. Another important point, and I should add that we're going to have an opportunity for questions, comments, and story sharing, whatever you want to do when I get to the end of my presentation. So maybe you send questions through or jot down little notes on scraps of paper and be prepared to sort of send them forward at the right time, because I really want this to be a chance for you to share your experience and your wisdom, because it's the wisdom other parents that really keeps us going. So, but a very important point is to be proactive, to not until a problem has arisen with your child's school, but rather to anticipate the kind of situations that might be difficult for your child and to work ahead of things, to get ahead of the curve and talk to the school before there's a problem. So this means establishing relationships with key adults at your child's school before problems have a chance to arise. The good news, we're still relatively early on in the school year, so you can meet people now if you haven't had a chance to go to a parent-teacher event. You can meet your child's teacher now, establish a connection, and begin to build a rapport. It's also a good idea into introducing yourself and talking a little bit about your child's strengths and challenges, to also ask the teacher or the special education resource person or whoever, what's the best way for me to get a hold of you if we're having a bad day? Like, should I leave you a phone message on your voicemail? Would it be better if I sent you an email? Would you like me to text message you? What is the ideal channel of communication for you to use to reach that person? Because you know, if your child comes home from school, they're all upset and they've had a horrible day and you're trying to troubleshoot some problems, you don't want to have to figure out then how to reach out to the school time, what to do. And then you won't take it personally if it takes a little while to hear back from the school. You'll know that that teacher only checks voicemail messages first thing in the morning or something, so you won't be stewing all night if you don't hear back. And that just makes it easier for you to do a good job of advocating for your child. When you're having this conversation with your child's teacher, ask what you can do at home to help your child to be more successful at school, and at the same time, share some of the practical strategies that you have figured out over the years that will allow the school to support your child's success at school. It really is a two-way street, and it should be an information sharing kind of thing where maybe you have some ideas, maybe you have some ideas, and you can both benefit from listening to and learning from one another. So go in with that spirit of sharing. Focus on building relationships. What you want to do is to create a climate of trust that's based on genuine caring and mutual respect. Not only is this important for the relationship you're trying to build with people at your child's school, it's also really important role modeling for your child. You want your child to see that, yes, in relationships, sometimes we have to work through hard things, but yes, we can also do that in a way that is caring and respectful of the other person's needs. Because we don't just have needs. It's not just us who have needs. The other person has needs too. So recognize that everyone needs to feel safe and supported, to know that they're being heard. So if you have a meeting with your teacher, don't just go in with a laundry list of things you want to talk about or put on the table and go into rapid fire mode where you're like, and this and this and this. Set aside some time to really listen and learn from what the teacher has to say. Maybe there are some unique challenges in the classroom that you wouldn't even know about unless you took that time to hear the constraints and challenges of that person's job. And you also want that person to feel that you're really listening and that you're going to try to work cooperatively with them as opposed to in a more adversarial way. So think collaboration rather than consultation. You're not just sort of paying lip service to hearing what they have to say, and you don't want them to do that to you either. For true engagement and true partnership. You'll find it easier to do this if you take a solutions-oriented approach. So think ahead of time about what would make life better for your child when they're at school. And you might be thinking of academic things, you might be thinking of social things, you could have a whole bunch of things on your radar. And be as specific as possible when it comes to discussing ways of making things better for your child at school. For example, what is working? This is your opportunity to give some really positive feedback to the teacher and tell them how much initiatives that they've already put in place that are working for your child. Like, I'm so happy my child is sitting at the front of the room because that way there are fewer distractions. And or I'm so happy you let him take an exercise break or something if he's feeling really restless, and then he can have that restless energy out of his system, and then he can settle down to work. Be prepared to talk about work there's some time on the school bus or in the halls where your child is experiencing a lot of. Talk about what's happening and then see if the two of you can brainstorm some possible solutions for working around that or providing more supervision or whatever seems to be the solution in that case. This is where it's really helpful to have conversations with other parents ahead of time, because sometimes they can help you to be aware of what is possible within that school and at that grade level. What kind of solutions have worked in the past for children who've had similar challenges, and ideas can you borrow from those other parents as opposed to feeling like you have to reinvent the wheel yourself? It's so important to involve our kids in these conversations. I love that little mantra that says nothing about us without us, and I think that really applies to children as well. Your child may be too young or may have some developmental challenges that prevent him from advocating for himself right now, but that doesn't mean that you don't need to take his point of view into account. Quite the opposite. Try to be your child's voice if he's not in a position to advocate for himself. So consider what you know about your child and what that might mean in the classroom environment. If your child can't handle distractions, you might make some specific recommendations on that basis. If your child has a lot of restless energy, likewise. So think, if my child was standing there in the IEP meeting or in the room with his teacher, what would he want the teacher to know that would be better for him? And sometimes it is possible for your child to be involved in a parent-teacher interview or to help you write a letter ahead of time saying these are the kind of things I really want the teacher and the parents to talk about. So if you have that ability, then seize the moment and do it. And when possible, look for opportunities to help your child develop self-advocacy skills over time. In a perfect world, you would be standing in the hall every time your child you, but sometimes he's going to need to be able to advocate for himself at school in order to get his needs met in the moment. So talk through potential situations ahead of time and help your child to figure out ways that he might handle that. So for example, if he's having a conflict with a teacher, what could he do to deal with that? Could he say, I need to go to the principal's office and take a break from this situation? Maybe there's a place in the school where kids can go just to let off some steam and, to calm down a little bit if they're feeling really frustrated and upset. My youngest used to send himself to the principal's office because he knew the principal really understood him and really supported him. So if he was feeling completely frustrated with a particular teacher, he could just say, I'm going to the principal's office. He could sit in the chair there. Even if he didn't actually talk to the principal, he could just sit there, calm down, and then go back to the classroom when he was feeling ready to re-engage. It's really important to understand your child's rights within the educational system. Now, ironically, I'm a Canadian parent who is going to talk a little bit about the U.S. system, just because I know a large number of people who attend these workshops tend to be from the U.S., but please take the general principles of this next part of the presentation and apply them to whatever is in place in your jurisdiction. So if this particular piece of legislation we're going to talk about in a minute may not apply beyond the US borders, but a large number of countries have similar types of legislation in place or have an understanding that a child has certain rights within the education system, even if those aren't spelled out quite as concretely as we might like. So depending on where you live in the world, you'll have to adapt this next little piece of the presentation. But if you are a parent with a child in the U.S., the good news is that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, says that your child has certain rights under the law. The bad news is that sometimes the rights that are guaranteed are not quite what we would want for our children. They are guaranteed a free, appropriate public education, which doesn't necessarily mean the best supports that could be available to a child. So you need to understand that there can be a little bit of a gap there, but instead of feeling discouraged or frustrated by that, you can take that as inspiration to try to advocate for the best options that can be put in place for your child. So it's important to understand a little bit about how this whole process works, and I can tell you as a Canadian parent, this is very similar in Canada. The process begins with an evaluation of the child and the creation of an IEP, or individualized education plan. And as a parent, you have a crucial role to play in the development of and evolution of your child's IEP. So a couple of important things here is you're not just rubber stamping some document that the school sends home and says, please sign on this. No, that's not what the IEP process is all about. It's supposed to be collaborative, which means that you are sitting down at the table as this document is developed. It is also supposed to be a living document, a document that evolves over time as people gain greater insights into what would be helpful for your child. And of course, let's not lose sight of the fact that children are constantly learning, growing, and changing. So the strategies that were in place and worked brilliantly last year may have to be revisited this year now that your child has turned a few pages in his developmental journey, or taken a few steps in his developmental journey. But let's talk a little bit about how the special education process works. And again, this is pretty US based, but the general principles will apply in other jurisdictions. So first of all, your child is identified as possibly needing special education and related services. And this identification process can happen in a number of different ways. It could be that you have a concern as a parent and you sort of flag this for the school. It could be the teacher has a concern. It could be another organization that's had contact with your child has identified your child as possibly benefiting from some specific supports. But for whatever reason, your child has shown up on the radar, and now people are going to try to figure out, is this a child who should be receiving some special education and related services? Then your child is evaluated, and the evaluation sets out to answer three key questions. One, does the child have a disability that would benefit from these types of supports? Two, what are the child's specific educational needs? And three, what services and supports would be the best choices for meeting those needs? So basically, it's like a detective process. They're going to try to figure out what they know about your child, what they need to know about your child in order to make the system work for them. And you could find that your child is asked to undergo a large number of assessments and so on. You'll likely be asked to fill out a number of questionnaires yourself, the classroom teacher likewise, because what people are trying to do is pull together all the best information they have about your child and then figure out what can we do to help. Now, sometimes you get the results of this evaluation and you think, they kind of missed the boat here. This doesn't sound like my child at all, or there's some really, really important information missing. If that's the case and you're a U.S. parent, you have the right to ask for an independent education evaluation. And you can ask the school system to pay for this evaluation. Unfortunately, this isn't how it works in Canada. If you don't like the evaluation, and you want another one, you're pretty much on your own to fund that yourself, and I'm sure that's the same in other jurisdictions as well. But the key thing here to think about, regardless of where you live, is you don't just have to accept this evaluation at face value. You can say, I think that something isn't right here, and I think we need to take a second look at this. Then within the US, your child's disability status is determined. Is your child, quote unquote, a child with a disability as defined by IDEA? And if you are a parent who has a child who has a mental health problem or challenge, you may find that sometimes there's a bit of a gap in how IDEA is interpreted when it comes to mental health concerns. We still have a long way to go in terms of providing full in-school support to students who are struggling with some kind of mental health challenge, but that isn't going to be news to you if you're the parent of a child who's struggling. So what I would say to take away from this part is just the fact that know that IDEA is meant to apply to children who have mental health challenges as well as physical health challenges, and not to allow anybody to sort of, push you aside and say it's not a situation where this applies. There's some specific verbiage which I've put in this slide that is drawn from the IDEA Act, so that way you can understand how and where this kind of support would apply if you have a child with a mental health struggle, and I will let you review that later on. You'll be able to review these slides after the fact, so don't feel like you have to be frantically scrolling down notes. Then, ideally, next your child is found to be eligible for services, and you meet with the team of experts to create the IEP, or individualized education plan for your child. Again, this should be a collaborative process between you and the school, and perhaps some other experts from within the school board. This means that an IEP meeting should be scheduled at a time that's convenient for you, and that you are informed in advance of the purpose and scope of the meeting, so that way you can prepare for it and you can have some time to think ahead of time about things you really want to emerge from that meeting. So again, you need to be able to have the opportunity to assist in the development of the IEP, and then you have to consent to your child receiving the services as recommended by the IEP document that is produced. If you don't agree with the plan for your child, you have the opportunity to either request modifications, or if that doesn't work, there's a whole dispute resolution process that kicks in. Then the IEP is implemented. The school is responsible for not only implementing it, but for reporting back to you about how your child is doing. An IEP sets out particular goals for the child for a particular period of time, and so when you get progress reports from the school about your child's general academic progress, you should also be getting details about their plan in meeting the goals as set out in their IEP. The IEP needs to be reviewed at least once a year, more often if you or the school think that's necessary, and your child needs to be reevaluated at least once every 3 years, although again, this can take place sooner if you or the school feel that there is a need for an earlier review. So this is really the discouraging piece and the important thing to remember. Far too many children who are struggling with mental health problems end up in either segregated settings in school, or they find their way into the juvenile justice system due to behavioral issues. We don't want this to be the case anymore. We know we can do better. So what you, by getting an IEP in place for your child and through your advocacy work as a parent, are trying to do is to ensure that there are appropriate supports in place to stop this so-called school to prison pipeline. We want children to receive mental health services and supports in the school and in the community. We don't want them to receive those services and supports by default via the juvenile justice system. It doesn't make economic sense, and it certainly doesn't make sense for children. So these are some of the things that ideally would be put in place to help keep your child on track in school. So comprehensive assessment, including an evaluation and spelling out of the situations that trigger your child's behavior, a school-based intervention plan that incorporates positive behavioral support, training, and so on. And maybe you might find that it's necessary for your child's schedule to be adjusted. If my child had a period where he was having a very hard time at school, and when we started him in a new school, his fourth school, we started him on a severe limited schedule. At first he was only going to school for a couple of hours a day, and given that he was in grade 8, this was not the norm, but it was the only thing that allowed him to cope and to do. The plan should also spell out sort of training that should be in place for school staff, and also how to coordinate with non-school providers. In other words, if your child is receiving support from other in the community, what needs to happen to make sure that they're part of this whole process of supporting your child. Obviously, as a parent, you want to keep very detailed records, because if you're trying to rely on your brain as a storage device, I can tell you from personal experience, your brain will get overloaded. So start a binder where you keep key information about your child's educational experiences and treatment records. So it could be everything from report cards to copies of assessments that are done at school or by other mental health providers. If you have been working through this process for a while, you know you will be asked for your child's medical and developmental history until you can practically recite it in your sleep. So maybe write one document that you could share at the appropriate times, talking about, when did he crawl, when did he roll over, all those kind of things. Notes about what treatments have been tried and how those played out in the past. Notes for research that you've done, copies of previous IEPs, and so on. Because if you have all this information in place and then you're going through yet another part of the assessment process, it feels a lot less overwhelming. I think that this is an important point to keep in mind, and I'm having a little trouble seeing the whole quote because the software is set up. So basically, I'm going to let you read it for yourself and just paraphrase. What we want for our children and for schools is for schools to help children to be successful so that way they can realize their full potential as adults, so that they can hold jobs, they can live on their own, and they can lead fully engaged lives in their communities. So in order to happen, there needs to be academic support and there needs to be broader social emotional support. Whole child, and we need to think of including all children in the school community so that way every child can benefit from these kind of opportunities at school. So up until now we've been talking about proactive and meeting with the school and putting plans in place. In a perfect world we wouldn't need this slide, but sometimes problems can arise. So what do you do when a problem arises? I think first thing, take a deep breath, because it is so frustrating and sometimes so heartbreaking to see your child struggle at school. So remind yourself that you and the other significant share the same goal, which is helping your child to be successful. Assume the best of the other person and focus on solutions as opposed to assigning blame. Model the relationship repair skills you would like your child to develop and to see you, and be prepared to bring fresh ideas to the table and to speak up if the strategies in place aren't working or don't seem to be a good fit for your child. I'd like to give you one example of a situation we dealt with my third child when he was quite young. He was in grade 3 and he was having terrible behavioral incidents at school. And so during one of these kind of parent-teacher meetings, the school suggested that maybe we might want to put our son on quote-unquote a modified schedule. And I said, well, that sounds like an interesting idea, but what's a modified schedule? Well, in their opinion, what they wanted to do was to allow him to go to school for half an hour a day from 9 till 9:30, at which point they thought it would be a good idea if I went to the school and homeschooled him for the rest of the day. Now, I have seen the benefits of homeschooling at different times, but I was always understanding that homeschooling should be something that is started at the parents' initiative, not the school's initiative. So it seemed a little bit weird to have somebody else suggesting homeschooling to me. And at that point, it simply wasn't the right solution, or I felt it wasn't the right solution for our son. I felt he really needed to work through some of his social and behavioral challenges in the school setting. So I talked to my son's pediatrician and I said, this is what the school is suggesting. I'm not quite sure what to do. And she said, if you don't think it's a good fit for your child, you need to speak up and tell them it's not a good fit, that it's not a viable option for your family either. So I did that. It felt a little scary, I have to tell you, to be across the table from a whole bunch of people from the school and say, no, I think that's a bad idea and we can't support that. But we had to take that stand. And there will be tough issues where you have to stand too, because you know that what is being suggested is not a good option for your child or for your family. And it would be unrealistic and unreasonable to try to pretend otherwise. So as you can see, I've sort of come to the end of my slides. I realize we still have a fair bit of time together, and I'm hoping that people may have some questions or comments they'd like to share. Maybe muddled through some of this territory yourself as a parent who has a child who has struggled, or maybe you have some I in the call could help to point you in the right direction. If so, that would be great. My website address and my Twitter address and so on, and I'd be happy to continue the conversation online over time, because this is really important to me and I know it's really important to you too. So thank you very much for your patience this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Anne.